Next, we're going to have our Texas Constitution lesson. As Scott comes up, I want to say to you guys, I hope you are realizing that Texas has a great constitution, and if we would use it, and if our leaders would use it, they have a lot of power afforded them, but they need to get off. And yes,
the legitimate power of civil government extends no further than to punish the man who works ill to his neighbor. That quote is from a letter written by the Danbury Baptist Association to President Thomas Jefferson back in 1801, and they very clearly state that the expectations back in the 1800s was that civil government has but one function: to punish the man who does evil against his neighbor. That's what we do. Right? But over the years, we've evolved what we expect the responsibility of our government, right? I mean, back in the 40s, FDR pushed forth what he called the Second Bill of Rights, also dubbed as the Economic Bill of Rights. And from there, you'll find some things that might sound a little bit familiar, things like Social Security, minimum wage, fair housing. Now, we've grown quite accustomed to some of those. No. We've grown dependent on some of those initiatives that were started back in the 1940s by FDR. And then in the 90s, we had President Clinton pushing forth the Patient's Bill of Rights. That sound familiar? He didn't quite get all accomplished he wanted, and so now we have what we might recognize as Obamacare, right? And now I'm kind of taking us on this path because what was the argument that they were saying for some of these laws? They said, the federal government's doing all this stuff, and do they have the ability? They don't have the right to tell us that, right? And what would they tell us? Why would they say that they could implement all these laws that we not necessarily agreed with? They cited the Supremacy Clause. I suspect most of us in this room have heard of the Supremacy Clause, but let me read the Supremacy Clause to you so that you'll know what they're telling us, right? They're telling us this federal law is the supreme law of the land. And why do they say that? Well, because our Constitution in Article 6, Paragraph 2 says, it says, the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. Oh, wait. I missed something. Let me try that again. This Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. Oh, wait. I missed something again. Let me try one more time. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made pursuant thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, that last part that I added in, what does that mean? That means that if we pass a federal law, but it doesn't comply with the Constitution, it is not the supreme law of the land. Amen. Right? So we now know that federal law must comply with the Constitution in order to be the supreme law of the land. So now I'm going to flip over to somewhere else in the Constitution. And this isn't in the amendments. This is Article 1, Section 9. And this is actually the topic that we have for tonight. And Article 1, Section 9 says, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in causes of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. So the writ of habeas corpus is tonight's topic. And now, I retired as a cop out in New Mexico. I was a cop for 20 years. Writ of habeas corpus, I've heard the phrase, watched it in Western movies. We even heard a lot of talk about it on the news from the pundits in January of last year, right? But it's not something that we're really all that familiar with. So let's look at what a habeas corpus is, a writ of habeas corpus. First, a writ. So a writ is either something written, a writing, a formal written document, or, this is the one that I think applies to us, a form of written command in the name of a court or other legal authority to act or abstain from acting in some way. So it's a written order from a court to do or not to do something specific. So that's what a writ is, okay? Real simple. It's a command from a court in writing. a writ of habeas corpus. Now, habeas corpus is a Latin word which literally means to produce the body or have the body. And so a writ of habeas corpus is an order demanding that an imprisoned or detained individual be brought before a court and shown a valid reason for the person's detention. Now, this can happen pre or post sentencing or pre or post conviction. So what it is it's a mechanism to bring somebody before judiciary to prove that they're legitimately detained, legitimately incarcerated. Now, to us that may seem kind of ridiculous because we have so many safeties in place now. We don't realize, back in the 1800s, 1700s, you go far back, they didn't have all this big monstrosity of a legal system that we have now to make sure that all these checks and balances are occurring when people are detained. But it is possible to be detained and not know why you're there, right? So now let's move on and let's see what the Texas Constitution says about the writ of habeas corpus. And I want you to pay special attention and see if you can notice anything different. So in Article 1, Section 12, habeas corpus is a writ of, it says, the writ of habeas corpus is a writ of right and shall never be suspended. The legislature shall enact laws to render the remedy speedy and effectual. And if you look further in Title I, which is the Code of Criminal Procedure in Chapter 11, you'll see a whole bunch of rules outlining how to go about a writ of habeas corpus. But now the question is, did anybody notice the difference? So there was two of them. The first one I want to point out is, in Texas, it says the writ of habeas corpus is a writ of right. The U.S. Constitution says the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. Now, I'm going to assume that everybody here knows the difference between a privilege and a right. And if you don't be ashamed. Just come and talk to me. I could do a whole class on the difference between a right and a privilege. But there is a very distinct difference between a right and a privilege. Now, the supreme law of the land says you have a privilege of habeas corpus, whereas the state of Texas says you have a right of habeas corpus. The other exception was, in the U.S. Constitution, there's unless. There's an exception. Unless in cases of rebellion, invasion, or public safety may require it. Texas says, shall never be suspended, period. That's actually a pretty substantial difference. We give no exception. Now, can we do that? The supreme law of the land says it's a privilege. We're saying it's a right. You can find it, though. There's two places that I want to refer to, and that's in our Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. We have the 10th Amendment and the 9th Amendment. Now, the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved for the states respectively or to the people. Okay, so that means that if it's not enumerated, if the federal government doesn't have it, the states have that right? But now the 9th, I think, actually more specifically addresses this issue, where it says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall never be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And now you got to realize why the 9th came about. The 9th came about because they're getting ready to write this list of rights in our Bill of Rights. And some people, our founders, were saying, well, the problem is if we give this list, you're going to have some government officials going to look at this list and say, if it's not here, it's not a right. And they said, no, we have a fix for that. We're going to have this thing called the 9th Amendment that says, just because it's not here doesn't mean it's not a right. In other words, you still have some rights, even though we don't list it specifically in here. Your rights still exist. And so you have to understand that the federal government is not in charge of the states. As a matter of fact, it's the other way around. The states created the federal government. So there's no way that the creation can be the master of the creator. Right? Does that make sense? So if the creation is not the master of the creator, that means the states are in charge of the federal government. They can't tell us that we can't give you more rights. We can tell you that you have a right regardless of rebellion. And now I'm going to go one step further, and this is Scott London speaking here. I'm going to tell you, and this is my humble opinion, you could, I'm sure, find plenty of attorneys that would disagree with me. But I would say that if you're within the boundaries of the state of Texas, I don't care if you're a federal prisoner or a state prisoner, you have a right to habeas corpus, regardless, with no exception.
Right.
Because the state of Texas has told you that if you're on our land, it's a right that we're going to make sure that that is never suspended. And so I'm going to kind of circle back now. And so we started off with what the purpose of the government is, or at least what the Danbury Baptist Association thought the legitimate power of government is, right? So now, where's another place that we find it, and I think I've talked about this before, is in the Declaration of Independence, where it says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men. That's why the government exists, to secure our rights. Deriving their just power from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute a new government.
Yes.
But I want to close with one other quote, because I think it's pretty important. And this one, it was actually E.B. and E.C. Kellogg back in 1864. They did a print, and they inscribed this inscription on the bottom of a print called Lincoln's Constitution. The people of the United States are the rightful masters of both Congress and courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert that Constitution. I'm telling you, we have a really good rule book right here. We have a great outline. We just have people that are not following it. And so what happens when those who make the laws don't follow the laws?
Right.
We even have in our Texas statute, we have one that I found recently, and I love it. It's in our government code that says that the government is the servant, not the master of the people. And we need to be sure and be quite vocal. Those of y'all that were there today, you know what I'm talking about. We need to be quite vocal and make sure that our government knows that they are not our master.
Yes.